We are live. I'm here again with the wonderful George Kinder. This is part three of a debate series that we've been having on fiat, fiduciary in all things, versus capitalism. And in part three, we are going to be talking about the truth. George, could you kind of tee this up for us? Why are we debating the truth in our fiat versus capitalism series?
Well, it is really interesting, isn't it, Blair? I mean, when we think about capitalism versus fiat, we think we're talking about an economic system, and that's primarily what we're talking about. But when you begin to look at what's happening now, today, in our world, in regard to kind of civilization, which includes, of course, the economic system, we find ourselves in opposite camps pretty much all over the world, and we're in opposite camps on practically everything. So it feels as if there's an undermining of the truth. I wouldn't say we just feels as if there certainly seems to be really an undermining of the truth in a lot of ways, and coming through powerful institutions, certainly through governments. That's always been the case, and why we have a free press to begin with. But now we seem to feel it through any large institution that has media power. So it can impact our health because of medicine. It can impact, it can completely undermine democracy. It can impact people. I mean, the kind of the inequality and equality of people. Um, but I think more than anything, it kind of shocks us and offends us. And it makes it very difficult for us to trust each other, much less the larger institutions, and then to participate as excited and loving and generous and virtuous citizens in the world, in a healthy world. So I think that's a long-winded answer, but I think that it all comes back to economics. Ultimately, impacts us all as we earn a living and as we spend our money.
That's a great intro. And so I'm going to be taking the side of capitalism in the truth. You'll once again be in the fiat seat. And you're absolutely right. There is definitely we see a lot of misinformation in the world today. Particularly, it is easier than ever to share information, to gain information, and that means that bad information is even easier to gain and spread around the world today as well. So we both agree on that. We're seeing a lot of misinformation. There are potential negative consequences, but the question is, what do we do about that? And so I'm going to take the side of free markets and capitalism, and that'll be, sort of my side. And you're going to take the argument that maybe a different standard would help us come to the truth. And I've been thinking so much about the truth ever since we decided we were going to debate this, because the truth is evolving. The truth is also perception. So you and I may have the same experience and have a completely different story about what happened, because our, little brains that are, neurons are connecting, in our perception of the same event may be different. And so that throws a wrinkle in things. But I'm going to take a US history approach to start this off, and say misinformation is not new. Misinformation was at the birth of the United States of America. In fact, the press was probably more politically polarized at the birth of our nation than it is today, if you can believe that. Literally, newspapers were owned by political partisans. They printed outright lies. They said that Washington was a monarchist and wanted to be a king, and Jefferson was a bloody revolutionary and an atheist who wanted to take us into a French Revolution style conflict, right? And so misinformation was not new. And the reaction to that was to pass a law called the Sedition Act. The Sedition Act made spreading false information about the President of the United States a crime. As you can imagine, could you imagine if that was the law today? How scary it would be to say something negative about the president to be a criminal act. And so, as you can imagine, the Sedition Act was wildly unpopular, and Jefferson allowed it to expire. And that actually prompted the way that we interpret the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. The thought of what does it mean to have freedom of speech, and how important freedom of speech is. And the courts in the US have held the line on protecting freedom of speech. It means that as Americans, we are free to speak against political candidates, political parties. We are free to speak against institutions. We are free to speak uh, untruths, even. We are free to speak terrible things that are lies that may disgust us. That is protected speech, and I do think that that free market style has contributed wildly to the success of the United States to date, despite the fact that that means that misinformation will be allowed to spread across the country. And so that is my opening remark here on the side of free markets when it comes to the truth.
Fabulous. Well, I wondered how you were going to come up with an argument for this, Blair, and you've done a great job, I will say. And I love it. I love hearing about the early press, and of course there was a lot of misinformation there. A few points about that are I think are valuable to think about. We're really looking at a time where, for the first time in the world, we have the coming together of all of humanity. It's like we're all of us have these smartphones, and so we can all of us, if the smartphone was required to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, we could all have our differences. You know, we come from different eras, we come from different genders, we come from different locations. We could all have our differences of opinion. But if we knew the same set of facts were facts, we could, in fact, vote, have an argument that was civil and looking at differences, and come up with, I think, what is best for humanity, what is best in any individual locale, what is best in any state, what is best in any nation, and what is best for the planet. So we're at a different place. Wonderful to hear that in the past they had a bunch of misinformation. It was kind of what the rule of the roost. But I think all of us feel that the misinformation over the last decade in in the West has gotten much worse. And part of it is because of this relationship of freedom of speech, which you're talking about, which I absolutely 100% with you, support it. And it's one of the things that is great about our society, as is the freedom of the press. The freedom of the press and the freedom of speech have begun to get conflated, so that Elon Musk, I don't want to name names, but he's an easy one to name. Um, Elon Musk can say, if you don't want to print what he wants to say, it's the squashing of his free speech, or it's the squashing of the freedom of the press. And when really what we're talking about with these billionaire figures owning so much of the information we have, and billionaire governments as well, is that if there are no standards for the truth, they can say anything they want and spread it widely and wildly across our ecosystem. So once again, we're left with distrust of all of our institutions, distrust of our media, distrust of each other. It eats away at society. So I think it's time for a different standard. I love capitalism, love freedom of the speech, I love freedom of the press, but what do they really mean? What how would we be thinking about them if we understood that all of our institutions had a fiduciary obligation to the truth ahead of their own self-concern? What would shift for us?
Yeah. And without a doubt, we have no disagreement that there's a lot of misinformation out in the world today, and that's the reason that we're having this debate. The question is, what do we do about it, right? And so I go back to what is different between 300 years, 250 years ago. We're having our 250th birthday as a nation next year, and today. And the difference is the amplification, the ability to share information is easier than it's ever been. It happens in a second, in a tweet, in a post online, in a video like the one we're making. Everybody can share information now, whereas the limitations of press, media, whatever you want to call it, used to be limited. Those early partisan newspapers, they physically had to print 1,000 copies and try to distribute them by hand. And so less people were literate, and it was just harder to get information. It moved slowly, and it gave people time to rebut the information that was being shared if it was in fact incorrect. And so what's different today is that we have these platform systems, these amazing technologies that allow you sitting in London and me sitting in New Orleans to have this live debate and share it with those of us that have joined us and those that will watch the replay. But the speed at which information can be shared and reshared is faster than it ever was. And so I would say that we've done a pretty good job. And again, I'm taking a US based, framework here, but it can be applied all around the world of using proper regulation as we do with capitalism to figure out, how do we structure this? But I do think that there's an opportunity to say, whereas we used to control the radio and television airwaves because those were limited facts places where people could receive information. Now it's broadened. Perhaps there are some opportunities for regulation on these technology platforms that would allow us to find some sort of medium for coming to the truth instead of spreading essentially lies that could be dangerous in the areas of public health, in the areas of democracy. But we have to be careful, because if you want to take this back to the conversation on the truth and science, and you've pointed out Galileo was a heretic, right? Not believed. So we have to be careful to protect new ideas, new information that may not be yet proven or may not be true today based on information, and allowing those ideas to trickle up and the cream to rise to the top, so to speak. Unfortunately, I think we have the opposite of the cream sometimes rising to the top on these algorithms that benefit and profit from tapping into our emotions of rage and discontent. And so I would point to using the same systems that we have in place today with free markets and regulation, proper regulation, without the stifling of potential new ideas. And also, unfortunately, without stifling of terrible ideas, but that would hopefully not rise to the top because they're just incorrect.
Wow. Wow. Blair, I never expected to hear you propose regulations to solve this problem. I mean, that's just astonishing to hear that from a free market capitalist like yourself. So I want to just counter that in a way and argue that, I mean, first of all, great stuff, really wonderful looking at that. I mean, the speed is something that we have to address, we have to deal with. And it's very concerning because it can take over in a moment. We can all be in a panic. We're so driven by our doom scrolling, so to speak, and by what immediately appears in front of us. So and that's a problem. That's a problem. Absolutely. And yeah, we could go back to the old regulatory stuff that we've done for hundreds of years now. But is it working now? Are regulations actually working? It seems to me that what's happening now is that the negative externalities, the unintended consequences, and sometimes the intended dark consequences of a business owned by just the very, very most wealthy people, that those consequences are happening faster than we can cope as a civilization. We've undermined democracy since Reagan. We've undermined government, and government doesn't have that kind of strength anymore. So, I mean, not that I think that it shouldn't, but I think there's something right. There's always been something right about America, kind of undermining powers that be. King George. Now we're doing government, but the truth is, right now, the big power is in big corporations and is in trillionaires that are about to emerge from the tax subsidies that the Trump administration is going to deliver to them. The thing that I want to say here about the speed, because we have a wonderful ally here. We have that is really not being our ally just at the moment. I'm looking to see. I don't have it in front of me. And there was just in the last couple of days, there was a Heather Cox Richardson article. She's on Substack, folks. I hope you read her. She's wonderful.
Shout to Heather. Give her a follow.
Yay, 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 shout out.
Subscribe.
Yeah, and I hope you came immediately here because she was just live with Paul Krugman. But now we've got the live stage, so I hope you're here with us. So Heather was writing about one of the major kind of thought leaders gathering data and trying to give us the truth. And now I've forgotten his name, of course, but he was using ChatGPT to, fine tune his argument. And among his statements, he made a statement about the co-director, the subdirector of the FBI, about one of the secretaries in the Trump administration, and about the one I remember is Pete Hegseth, yeah, who is the Secretary of Defense, and saying that Pete was had formerly been a Fox News, opinion, whatever, person, and ChatGPT came after this post and said, "You've said a mistruth on all three of these things." And they're all the most obvious fact that you can find anywhere, and that we all know from having just kind of watched history and watched the careers of these people. So that's ChatGPT. So that's how AI has been kind of programmed somehow, coming up with its own misinformation and challenging real reality, real facts. So if we had a fiduciary standard for all organizations, that couldn't happen. That wouldn't happen. And in fact, ChatGPT and OpenAI and all of AI would be the most powerful support we could have, because AI can tell us what is true and what isn't in so many different areas, can read the nuances. And and that means that we have this incredible ally who can discover things instantaneously and report on, is it true or isn't true? Fabulous. Let's do it. Let's have a fiduciary standard where all of our corporations and all of our governments are held to a standard to put the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth ahead of their own self-concern.
It sounds utopian, and I want to go there with you, but I think that it's really, really hard to implement. Because again, was the Earth the center of the universe? Was the Earth flat? Or was Galileo, the crazy man back then proposing this theory, actually right? And what is it that we do not yet know to be true that we will later learn? And so we are on a spectrum here. We are progressing. We are learning more and more. And so it is really hard. Of course, the sky right now, as I see it, is blue. Maybe if someone's eyes were built differently because of a future mutation in our genetics, maybe it won't be blue. And so that's where I come to this argument of it's really, really hard to figure out where to stand on the truth. I do think it's important for a society to be operating under a similar set of facts. You're in London. I was telling you as we were preparing for this how stark of a difference it was, and actually quite calming to watch the news over there as they report in sort of the old Walter Cronkite fashion, just sort of reading out very calmly. Today, a man stabbed 5 people, and like not even any hyperbole. It's a little shocking to see that sort of calm demeanor of the news versus in the U.S. where we have very entertaining television news. We have extremely opinionated, what used to be radio now coming on to podcast. But how do we get to the truth without stifling and stepping on someone else's free speech? I think is a very scary proposition, because as we know, if institutions and power such as governments are controlling what can be said and repeated and printed and shared in the internet, then we get to a very scary situation of propaganda, right? As we all know, we don't want to live in a world where the government controls the message. And so it's a fine line. It's difficult to figure out, how do we get to the truth? I would like to apply this free markets, the cream will rise to the top. Democracy has always been a messy proposition from its very beginning. And yet it is the best way we have found to protect people's rights on individuals in a free society, and we have to be willing. I think it was Ben Franklin, and if I'm misquoting, we will fix that later. Who said you can choose safety or freedom, but you can't have both. And so, unfortunately, to choose freedom, which I think we do agree is the better process to be in, maybe we do have to put up, unfortunately, with some misinformation, and at this point, a lot of misinformation out in the ether, and hope that the truth, the cream, will truly rise to the top, as Galileo's theories have done, and as other scientific discoveries have done. And it's unfortunate, and we're in a strange situation. The progress of humanity is not a straight line up; it is a squiggly line with ups and downs. And perhaps we will be able to muddle through this if we don't step too hard on it. And so I want this kumbaya world where everybody is looking out for the best interest of everyone and the planet. It's difficult to get there in practice and in application. And so that's where I think a free markets perspective on this is truly the best, truly the best method for getting us to the truth while we have to muddle through some unfortunate situations as we are at this moment in time.
So I love it. I mean, if we have free market, wow, that would be so incredible. But right now we have, back in 1980, we had 50 corporations that controlled like 90% of the press, 90% of the media. Now it's down to five. And then we have a handful of um, billionaire owners of social media. So the top three or four, you take Elon Musk and the Ellison family, and Bezos, and I've missed one of them. Oh, well, anyway, you take the top four, and they own a huge percentage of the media. So is that a free market? Are we getting a free market of news from those guys? You got to be kidding me. And then on top of that, you've got an administration where virtually every cabinet member is a billionaire. So they're all on the same side. So do you think you're going to get really uh, um, truthful news about possible solutions to the dramatic inequality on the planet right now and in America right now? Can't happen with that kind of setup. So this notion of safety or freedom, one of the questions I ask, I know you've heard me say this, that I go around, I do these kitchen table conversations. I haven't gotten to the billionaires to do it with them yet. I don't know what they'd say, but the question is, how would you feel? How would you feel if every institution you encountered in your life was trustworthy and humane in everything it did? How would you feel? Now, what's really interesting when you talk about Ben Franklin's safety and freedom, and I'm not going to question who did it or who said that, but is that I get both. I get responses in both directions. I get a huge number of people saying, "Wow, what a relief! Oh my God, it would make my life so much more easy. I would have so much more ease in my life, and and not only would I trust institutions, but I'd be able to trust my neighbors. What a difference that would make." And then I get the other response, which is, wow, if I could trust institutions, if I could trust the news, if I could trust the government to do what is humane, boy, I, I'd deliver entrepreneurial, stuff. I'd be out there making things happen. I'd be wildly creative. And right now I feel that I can't because I'm concerned about corruption. I'm concerned about honesty, frankly. So I don't think it's either or anymore. Maybe it was in that person's day, but I don't think it is anymore. And I want to say one more thing about freedom of speech and truth. I'm all for freedom of speech for everybody. Everybody. I don't think a corporation is a person. And so we've given this kind of freedom of speech in so many ways to corporations. And the big billionaires get to hide behind their own personal incorporation, right? And they speak from that standpoint, so they don't get sued. So I think that what fiat does is an amazing thing. It leaves us, every individual, every human being, the freedom of speech. What it does is it insists that institutions put the truth ahead of their own self-concern. every institution. Shouldn't we be doing that? I mean, we've created this amazing thing. I mean, we call it capitalism. What is it? It's hierarchies of power, really. And we've created these hierarchies of power all over the world. And now suddenly it looks like they're turning on us as, King George back in the 18th century turned on us. Um, it's very simple. Let's just insist that um, those institutions speak the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth.
So you hit on a good point there, which is the consolidation of the ownership. And we already have a structure to deal with that, right? The regulation of, no monopolies and trust busting, we have a history of doing that. We've been lazy on it, I would admit, lately in the United States. And so I do believe the mechanism for preventing that and disposing of that already exists. We just need to implement it. And I do believe we also need to start putting those same impetus on the platform systems where, and there was some self-regulation that was happening at one point. Some of that has been deleted. Let's get everybody playing under the same fair rules and guidelines that we already have applied in the past, and let's start reapplying those systems that we have in place to make sure that we don't have the consolidation of ownership, especially in something as important as the media. And that's further reason not to stifle the free speech of the little guys that are out there creating their podcasts, creating their Substack lives, right? That's all the more reason to allow more freedom of sharing of information, not less. We do have some, court cases in the U.S. again, because I think it's a good framework for how we can approach this conversation on limits of free speech, because it is not completely unlimited. So we do, interestingly enough, in past court cases, have a limit on freedom of speech that is an incitement of an imminent lawless action, such as urging a crowd to storm a building right now. That's very interesting. We have a limit on making true threats. We can't, it's illegal to say, I'm going to kill you right now and actually mean it. Obscenity, although interestingly enough, pornography is protected. Child pornography, no go. And that's a good thing. Defamation, of course, there are libel and slander laws, but you have to prove actual malice. It can't just be an accident to share misinformation about a person. You have to truly know that it's wrong and be malicious in that defamation. We do regulate advertising. When I was little, Joe the Camel was in every magazine and a cartoon that no longer is allowed to advertise cigarettes to children. I think that's a great use of regulation that we have done. And so, there are limits to people working in government and their official roles to their speech. We do limit in certain settings, such as teachers, military, prisons, and even the media. As you mentioned, the fairness doctrine we used to have until the late 80s when sort of media opened up and it was not as, regulated. So I think, those proper interpretations of the law and limitations on harmfulness, I think we could take another look at that and within that framework, shore up some of these issues that we're having. And one of the issues that I think is really important to harp on right now is misinformation around medicine and science. And that's sort of cropped up ever since the COVID pandemic, which is very scary when that misinformation could result in harming people's health. And that's a real challenge that we're going to have right now, especially with trust in government entities and public health officials. I think there needs to be sort of a postmortem on, what went right, what went wrong in government reactions to the pandemic. How can we make sure that the next time that happens, because it will. I mean, humans have been fighting viruses for our entire existence. It was actually rare that we had that period of time in the 20th century up until COVID where we weren't fighting such things. But to figure out how, at what point do the social impacts of public health regulation outweigh individual rights, such as with vaccines, right? It's important to make sure that we trust the science there. And so I do think that we have an opportunity to revisit the structures that are already in place and properly apply them. I think we've taken the eye off the ball right now. And so instead of insisting that everyone at all times, all institutions must be truthful, especially when we know that truth could be potentially a spectrum. Again, with that perception issue, you and I might have a different truth of an experience that we both share. We are learning, we are continuing to have more information come in the scientific and health community. So it's a fine line to walk. I understand there's no perfect solution, but I do think there are mechanisms in place that are just not being applied right now when it comes to regulation and the laws.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, there are a lot of regulations that we've had and that are still on the books in some way that if they were really being applied, honestly, that a lot of the problems that we're having right now wouldn't be happening all over the world and certainly all over America. But that's not happening. And that's not happening for a reason. And part of it has to do with this, misuse of truth. I mean, when you talk about regulations, I'd love to see it. And I'd love to see, as you were saying, a post-mortem, fine tuning the application. Where's the Congress that's going to do that? Where's the joint consensus? And again, a lot of this has to do with truth and the buying of the truth by politically motivated, fearful of tax regulation, extreme billionaires, and that's so we've really given that away. There's a reason why that's not happening, and I will say one other thing about why I think it's fiat is better than just simply applying regulations that we have. And that's one of the things you mentioned earlier, and I was talking about it with AI as well. The speed at which things are happening is so extraordinary. And it can be dangerous, obviously, when you think about war or the planet or democracy. It can be dangerous in a lot of ways. Dangerous in terms of vaccinations and impact generations, if not the whole future of humanity. So, so that speed with which things can happen can't be addressed easily. I mean, we have just in terms of science, we have so many incredible new inventions, AI being one of them. Where's the rules on the books to govern AI? We have to think
Yeah.
and we have to be together and do it. So a lot of the regulations, and a lot of the regulations are looking at the past. What did you do in the past that violated this regulation? So we have to wait until somebody violates it. And then we have to go through all the court process, and God knows what the courts are doing right now. We have to go through this incredible process to make it happen. How much easier and how much more wonderful it would be if we knew that every single CEO, every single government official, placed because they represented an institution, placed the truth ahead of their own self-concern. Not to mention democracy and the planet and the people. Just how incredible that would be. And that means that they're constantly looking, they're listening. That's the way an organic structure works. It doesn't work by looking at the past, seeing what went wrong, and fixing it. It works by having the virtues of humanity, the values of humanity, the values of organic creation built in. And one more thing that I should have said a long time ago, this whole thing about the spectrum of truth. Um, I've written an article. I know you've seen it,
Yes.
and it echoes, Blair's post because it's called the bell curve of truth,
Different
and
bell curve, but yes.
different bell curve. It is. But it's called the bell, and I didn't mean to take it from you in any way. It just is the right thing, right?
It's all right.
The bell curve of truth, and I think that the approach to truth in terms of the spectrum, of course, we need Galileo when he's a renegade. We need wild theories. We need them. And we need them in order to test them and see if they are true. And if they are true, we need to bring them into the center of the bell curve. But and so we need a spectrum on what is reported, certainly in the news that we vote from. Because if we don't know that we're voting on common facts, we can't vote intelligently or vote on facts to begin with. We can't vote intelligently. But if you have a bell curve where facts are in there, standards of measurement are in there, investigative journalism, the way they used to require two witnesses independently to say things, that's in there right under the center of the bell curve. Perjury, People, the standards of law are right there in that as well. Scientific truth, how science measures things, how science is determines things, is in there in that document of truth. But we have things that are further out, and we have outright lies that are way out there. Okay, so we don't want outright lies in there at all. But I think that you could design a bell curve. I put a proposal out for it. I just don't know what the percentages are. What are the percentages that we want reported in news media that we're going to vote from? What are the percentages of truthfulness that we need to vote? And if we can't have that, why are we messing around? Why do we think we have a democracy? So anyway, it's time for it, and it's much easier if we had heroes at the top, if the CEOs of America and of the world and all of the legislators were heroes to our young folks. My heart goes out to them because they don't have any at this point. It's a dystopia, is what they say. Time for truth.
Yeah, and one of the things that we haven't touched on was the concept of historical truth, which is really interesting. As my daughter and I have been watching these National Geographics on the studies of Egyptian civilization and now the Mayan civilization and what they wrote down versus what we know, and the thing about the historical truth is that the winners, the survivors, write history. And I think that it's important to, amplify the ability of historians to tell different versions of the story. I've been watching Ken Burns' new
Oh,
documentary on the
yeah.
American Revolution and
Hmm,
trying to highlight different versions of, what was it
hmm,
like for the women? What was it like for the free people of color? What was it like for the
hmm.
Native Americans and all the
Oh,
perspectives? And
yeah.
I think it's really important for us to um, education may be the solution here as well, George, right? The ability to teach our young people the skill of critical thinking so that when they process information that is being given to them, that they are able to apply that spectrum of the truth, right? Is this someone's opinion? Is this a political figure speaking, in their own interest versus mine? Is this a corporation's point of view? And they're speaking to what will become profitable and not necessarily what is best for me to consume and my health and my well-being. So perhaps instead of figuring out how to properly regulate or to just apply a standard when it's really hard to even sometimes define what is true, perhaps the skill set we need for this future world of technology and now AI, it's very scary that AI is unfortunately not spitting back to us at all facts, but is instead sort of jumbling up what is maybe untrue that has been said and then divorcing that from the facts. Maybe the real answer to all of this is to through our education system to teach critical thinking. I am lucky that I had an education that was very strong in that, and so anytime I'm coming across information, maybe I'm writing a blog, maybe I'm looking up something to help a client interpret uh, tax law for their plan, going back to the primary source. I remember learning what is the primary source, right? Not just what you heard on the radio or what you read in the newspaper or what you saw on Instagram, but what's the primary source of that information and how do we think critically about how to uh, basically decipher in one way it's the golden age of information. In another way, there are dangers to that. And so what we want to make sure we do though is preserve freedom of speech, preserve the ability for people to disagree, preserve freedom in general around the world, spread freedom and democracy further around the world. And although we have to admit it is going to be messy in the process, the sausage making process is messy, that we will eventually converge. Eventually, potentially, Americans will get tired of hearing from their political leaders untruths and gaslighting and propaganda, and they will vote the other way. But that's the thing about the freedom of democracy. We get to vote for what we want. And so maybe this has to actually come from the ground up. The people have to say, we don't want this anymore and we're going to do away with it. And the good news is they have the freedom to do that in free countries. So that's kind of my wrap up. I'll let you have the last word. And then I want to thank everybody for being here. Feel free to type in a question or a comment. We're happy to stick around and talk some more.
Right on. And great finale there, Blair. And I'm just going to say one thing about critical thinking. Well, maybe a couple of things. First, it's fabulous. I mean, if we all were trained in critical thinking, our kind of the future adult education would be so powerful. Science would be so powerful. Our understanding of human evolution would be so powerful, and our dedication to doing the right thing would be so powerful. Fabulous. And when you're applying it to truth and saying to the kids or whoever, "Hey, just apply critical thinking to the news," you're blaming the victim. We're victims. We're victims of massive misinformation from the top, from trillionaires, billionaires, and big governments, all the way down. And it's a simple thing to fix by simply requiring all institutions to realize that the truth comes first. Your self-interest, we'll give you the incorporation, we'll give you all the rights of incorporation, but you can't use those rights and then misinform us and tell us things that are not true. That just ain't going to work. It's not sustainable, primarily. But I hate to see putting all the and I think but the billionaires love to see you putting all the responsibility on the young. Yeah, if it's, just learn critical thinking and it'll all be okay. Um, I mean, that would be wonderful. It is a great thing, critical thinking. But we do not need misinformation coming from large institutions. They should know better. And they will know better if we apply a fiduciary standard. One more thing about education, and that is that right now there's an undermining of education. Universities are being undermined, and they're being undermined in a lot of ways. It's been being undermined in many different ways, but the main sources of funding for our institutions come either from government or from large corporations. So once again, where's the standard of truth? Why is the standard of truth not first and foremost? And to be a civilization that thrives for a long, long time, we need great education. We need all of our kids educated, and educated in critical thinking, among other things. So we have our differences, but it's been wonderful to be here with you, and I hope we'll get some responses from the audience. What do you think, audience?
Yeah,
Where do you come
we
down on this?
we do have one comment. You're both doing great. And freedom is the choice over safety in my case. So that's one comment. We won't say that that's the definitive answer to who won this debate. But that's very nice. And feel free. I'm going to tell one more story while we're waiting to see if anybody else has a question or a comment. I heard a very interesting story as I was driving to work. I still listen to the radio. While I drive, and there was an interesting story about ammunition and lead in ammunition that is potentially causing lead poisoning in our beautiful bald eagles. And there was an individual talking about how do we get hunters to use copper bullets instead of lead so that we don't have
Hmm,
sick eagles.
hmm,
And the point being made was you got to think about how you do it. You can't regulate it. If you say we don't allow bullet companies to make lead bullets, they have to make copper bullets, you'll have a backlash. Instead, conservationists are the people who probably care even more about the world and the eagle. They don't want sick eagles. That's not what they're there for. They're there because they're the original people who care about the land and the animals. If you educate them about why the copper bullets don't make the eagle sick and are actually just as accurate, if not more so. They might cost a little more, so that's an issue. They will do it on their own. I think that's a very interesting analogy to the application of getting to the truth. Don't mandate it, but allow people the opportunity. And it's the same thing with like mask mandates. People don't want to get sick, right? They want to protect their health. But when you try to mandate something, we're human beings, it's not, it may go so that's the application of things, and it's sometimes rather than just let's get to the right answer. You have to realize that you're trying to move us animals, the thinking human being, into changing their behavior. So I thought that was an interesting analogy that made me think of this debate. So
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'll just close with a little something on heroes again. I think if we, you talk about safety versus heroes. I think
mhm,
if we had freedom, safety versus freedom,
mhm.
I think if we were able to look at the leadership that we have in our organizations, in our corporations, in our nonprofits, in our governments, and we all really saw heroes there, really incredible people, I think that there would be much greater freedom and much more drive to create freedom using all of the skills that we have. Fiat will make sure that happens.
Yeah, I agree with you. Wonderful people at the top is definitely a goal that we should all be striving for.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Blair. This has been great.
Thank you, George, and
Yeah,
thanks to everybody who tuned in. And I hope you have a wonderful end of the year and holiday season. I look forward
yeah.
to maybe picking up the conversation again here in 2026.
Here we go.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care.
Thanks so much. Yeah, bye
Bye,
bye.
everybody.